Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this ASPPH Presents webinar as we spotlight the honorees of the Delta Omega 2020 Innovative Curriculum Award. My name is Erin Williams, Manager of Program Services for ASPPH. This session is being recorded and will be available on the ASPPH website shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. Please note that attendees may report one CPH recertification credit for participation in this webinar. You may ask questions or submit comments in writing at any time during the presentations by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will hold questions until both presentations are finished. Today, we will be learning how our awardees are bridging the gap between public health academia and practice and stimulating the evolution of innovative graduate public health courses that are responsive to the educational needs of the public health workforce. It is my honor to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Dr. Jessica Kruger, Clinical Assistant Professor at the University of Buffalo School of Public Health and Health Professions, is a health educator whose research focuses on consumption and addictive behaviors, health behavior decision-making, and pedagogy in public health. Dr. Laura Lennan, Senior Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs at the University of North Carolina Gillings School of Global Public Health, has overseen the reimagining, development, implementation, and evaluation of the Gillings MPH core in 3 formats: residential, online, and distance, with 13 concentrations in an integrated school-wide core. She has worked collaboratively to achieve steady student enrollment growth and improve diversity within the 35 degree programs offered at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level, has worked with the school and departmental leadership and student services professionals to reorganize how student services are delivered, overseeing the revision of school-wide appointment, tenure, and promotion process to create a more equitable system for all 230 fixed term and tenure track faculty members at Gillings School. And Dr. Karen Yates, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at the University of North Carolina Gillings School of Global Public Health, teaches courses ranging from undergraduate introductory public health to graduate level introductory epidemiology, with a consistent focus on collaboration and experiential learning in the classroom. Thank you all for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming our first honoree, Dr. Jessica Kruger, Gamma Lambda at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Kruger.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to share a course entitled Incarceration and Public Health. This course was really driven by current trends in what we're seeing in incarceration and really rethinking the role of public health in the criminal justice system and opportunities to train our students in this. So I'm going to go over a little bit of course rationale, design. We'll talk about the activities and where this course is continuing to grow and be revised. So this course was actually funded by the IPAN Seed Grant Program through Columbia University. It is an exciting opportunity to be able to have this support, which I'll talk a little bit about what some of the funds were utilized for. So overall, public health traditionally hasn't looked very closely at the criminal justice system. But if you think about incarceration rates, if this chart was relabeled anything else, that we were exponentially above any other developing country or developed country with rates such as this, public health professionals would be outraged. We'd want to begin to change some of those rates and think about the overall contributing factors to incarceration. And so this course has really taken the focus of moving the thought of incarceration outside of just the criminal justice lens into a public health view. We know that there are disparities and people are incarcerated at different rates based on race. And this has come to light as something that we really need to think about, not only from a policy perspective, but a law perspective, and also what are the factors that are driving this? Are there ways that we can change some of those social influences or help to modify what's happening in the community to change the look of this. 1 in 3 Black men will be incarcerated in their lifetime. That should be an outrageous statistic for anyone to really think about. Furthermore, I'm in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior. I want to look at, I always think about people returning to the community. 95% of all people who are justice involved will come back to that community. So it's important to not only think about the person while they're serving their sentence, but also how that's impacting the community in which they're returning to. We see that federal prisoners and jail inmates have chronic medical conditions. Hypertension is one of those major conditions that we see. Oftentimes, after people are released, they have more health conditions than when they went in, due to the environment, the diet, and the lack of physical activity. And that moves into obesity and overweight. Furthermore, we've shifted our focus from drug offenses to hopefully rehabilitation in public health and a harm reduction approach. And so with 1 in 5 people behind bars, this really highlights the need for some policy and health focus for these drug offenses versus locking people up for their addiction. And then also, people are working behind bars for very little money. If you have seen the documentary 13th, I recommend checking it out. It talks about some of how slavery has a different look today, but is still occurring behind bars. So these are all topics that we discuss in this course. So this is an undergraduate public health course for majors and minors. They need to take an introduction to public health course, and they also have to be of junior senior status to be take part of this discussion-based class. We really focus on analyzing the challenges in which incarcerated individuals and communities face. We have guest speakers, which have thankfully been funded through the IPAN grant to pre-COVID come to the university and even have lunch with our students. So they get to connect with researchers from around the US and even activists. In this course, it's important to bring in diverse voices and perspectives. So although we're reading peer-reviewed sources and literature, we also want to bring in the voice of people who are incarcerated. The Marshall Project does a great job in bringing in those voices and providing some of a different outlook for the students. So the course is broken up into 4 major modules. We first start off with what is the overview of the criminal justice system, which is incredibly complicated within the US. We look at the social and structural contributing factors. And this is where we can talk about some of the issues of community policing, the school to prison pipeline, things that as future public health professionals, we can hopefully begin to change some of these structural and social contributing factors. The largest section of this course is on health and incarceration. So we look at a variety of different issues, both infectious and chronic diseases. And then, of course, what is life like after incarceration for individuals? How can they begin to rebuild, and what sort of programs are available? Where can public health begin to play a role? The learning objectives are really focused on having students describe, explain, and analyze content in this course. So they get to work on a variety of projects, which I'll explain in just a moment. But I think it's important for them to understand the different systems of incarceration, local, state, and federal. And we talk about the differences between states and even between countries and the criminal justice system. We also want to talk about how entry into prison or any sort of detention can impact the community's health. Basically, these individuals are taken out of their communities, taken out of their families. What is the ripple effect to that? And then the impact of racial inequality. This is a topic that we talk about throughout this course. And with many of the social movements that are happening nowadays, this is becoming more apparent to students, and they want to get involved. They want to make change within their community. We look at the overall health impact, but also barriers to reentry. And we, in a public health course, want to try to think about strategies to reduce the impact of mass incarceration. And so we've actually shifted this course a little bit to bring in some more activism into our curriculum. So the assignments in this course, they've shifted slightly because of COVID. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the differences. In our course, I really like students to have oral and written communication. It's essential for our workforce. And so our students actually work in groups to create a podcast. And their podcasts are on a variety of different topics that we discuss throughout the course. Each year, we pick the top podcast, and that's incorporated in the course for the next semester. So it's a great way for students to learn from and about each other. These podcasts, students have interviewed local leaders who are fighting the good fight against some of the injustices. They've talked to people who have been incarcerated previously and tell a story. But it's a great way for them to practice that oral communication skills and work through group work. Furthermore, infographics, this is a great way to display data. And so you'll see that this is an example of one of the students' infographics. We actually share the infographics and podcasts with local organizations who have highlighted our students' work in the community. They also write a research paper focused on one topic related to health throughout this course, and they turn that research paper into an op-ed, which they submit to a local organization or local newspaper to highlight the challenges that the justice-involved population faces. Students get to practice that oral communication by being discussion leaders twice during the semester. So they're the one actually leading the conversation when we meet. And then journal reflections. This has been added since COVID, and this course has gone completely remote. The journal reflections allow for students to really synthesize the content and use peer-reviewed resources to support their views. Oftentimes this course gets emotional. And so I want to always bring it back to the facts versus the emotions. Students tend to really love these. And in fact, some of the reflections are actually activist projects. So we write a letter to the local sheriff about harm reduction, and that we hope to be incorporated into our local holding center. And so this gets students really excited about beginning to make some of that change. Pre-COVID, we also included experiential learning opportunities. So early in the course, as we were learning about contributing factors to incarceration, we would go down to our local courthouse and watch bail bonds hearings. This was incredibly eye-opening for students because you don't realize in 30 seconds someone's future can be determined. And so in watching these hearings, students would take that experience and tie that throughout the class of realizing that how socioeconomic status is linked to incarceration, how if you can't afford someone to represent you, how that you only have a few seconds to talk to your public defender. And this is really being in the court setting itself just has a very visceral feeling. And at one time, we even saw someone get an astronomically high bond, which the students continued to talk about throughout that semester. We would also go to the local holding center. And this is an interesting, not only from a viewpoint of seeing how people are treated behind bars locally, but also our holding center shows the view of two different eras in incarceration. And so part of our holding center is the old bars and that you see in old movies like Alcatraz. And the other part of the jail actually has pods. And so we can begin to talk about that and how people are treated behind bars. And we get a glimpse of the interactions between the justice involved and the officers, which is always a topic of discussion. We've had a lot of successes in this course so far. We've offered it for 4 semesters now. And we've been able to do the experiential learning trips because of the funding through the grant. We also have a subway system in Buffalo. Most people don't realize this, but it starts at the university and goes straight downtown. So we're able for very little cost to take students to these locations, which just has made this opportunity possible. We're able to hear and meet from experts from various fields. So there aren't a lot of people in public health studying this topic, but there are people from other fields who provide a diverse perspective, including people from political science, local activist groups, also nationally known scholars. And so we're able to bring people in from other areas, medicine, law, to talk about their perspectives and their views on the system and where we can make an impact. The students have done a fantastic job of making podcasts and infographics. It's so fun to really watch them go through this process because frankly, I don't teach them how to make a podcast because I don't really know how to make a podcast. And so they get to learn technology. We have support systems through the libraries to help them with the editing process. And so this is a great way for them to try something new, but also put these 2 elements into their portfolios and really be able to show future employers that they have some skills to create media and oral communication. And it's really eye-opening for students to really think about this topic. Most of us don't go through our days and think about people who have been sadly put behind bars for many reasons that really shouldn't be. And it provides students an opportunity to not only share their experiences with law enforcement or the criminal justice system, their families, if they're comfortable with it, but think about on a broader perspective and make change, right? We want our students to go out and make change in this world. So some student feedback that I think is just really nice to see. Going on field trips and having guest speakers in this class helps to enhance my learning experience. Going on the tour of the holding center really helped me understand how our prison system is very different from what we would expect to see. I love the group discussion, field trips, and videos we watched in class. I'm glad we all got to share our opinions on topics. The podcast assignment was very fun and unlike any assignment I've done before. And these are just a few. This is always, I love teaching this course because it's the easiest course to get great course evaluations on because students are so engaged and enjoy the topic content so much. So what's next, right? We always want to continue adding to our courses, making them better. And so I'm working this semester to really make more connections with local organizations. Our students love to hear what's happening locally or within the state. And so by making these connections, we're beginning to foster more of a community connection with this problem. We have a mayoral race coming up, and actually the next mayor is going to come talk to, or hopefully the next mayor is going to come talk to our class about this, because historically in Buffalo, there's been a lot of issues around the holding center and the treatment of incarcerated individuals. And so it's going to be great to hear some even political perspectives. We're continuing to advocate, and students love the component where they can feel like they're making change, and I hope they are. You know, there's so much to be done. We all have our role in chipping away at the problem. And so by writing a letter to the sheriff and sharing op-eds, a few op-eds have actually been published. And so it's a great success for the students and to get the word out. We also realize that, connecting students with career opportunities is so important. They realize that this is an area that they want to go into and are incredibly passionate about. And so we've now been able to work with our MSW MPH program to begin to create those opportunities and help the current system locally and within the state recognize that public health professionals in the criminal justice setting could begin to accelerate that change that we hope to see. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kruger. We really appreciate your time and your effort, and what a fascinating course. So timely and so innovative and so interactive, and I want to take your course, so I might come up to Buffalo. Thank you again, and now I am happy to welcome Dr. Laura Lennan and Dr. Karen Yates.
Great, thank you. That was such a fantastic presentation, and really excited to be part of this group today. Just pulling up the slides. Forgive me, here we go. All right, everyone hopefully can see that. So I'm here on behalf of about 65 or more faculty, students, and staff who have been involved in revising our Gillings MPH core curriculum. So myself and Karen are here on behalf of that group, and we're just delighted to have a chance to talk with you about the transformation we went through at Gillings from a traditional approach to our core curriculum for the MPH to a more integrated approach. So I will be able to advance the slides. There we go. So today we're going to talk a little bit about giving a little bit of an introduction to Gillings, just so that you have some perspective about our school. I know we've talked about our core curriculum before, and schools are in such different sizes and shapes and forms, and so I think it's helpful to hear a little bit about our structure so that you kind of know where we're coming from in terms of our, as I said, our transformation, a little bit about the history, but then the heart of the talk is I'll shift it over to Karen, and Karen's going to talk a lot about the details of the actual curriculum and give some examples. To get started, you can see that Gillings has been around for a long time. We have a long history and a proud tradition of public health, practice-based public health here in North Carolina and around the world. We have about 230 faculty and 300 plus staff, and thereabouts 1,700 students on any given year, and that's across 3 degree programs. And of course, my dogs decided downstairs to be barking, and so I apologize for that, but I'll just keep going. They should settle. So we have, that's a little bit about, we have 7 departments and a public health leadership program that make up the structure. We have a proud tradition in our department, strong departments, as many historical schools of public health have. And we have had a very engaged process in thinking about this. So back in 2015, prior to the Council on Education and Public Health announcing the new competencies for training in public health, we actually had started a process. I want to acknowledge the many folks out of the 65, here's a bunch that have been involved in our process. We have a current core teaching team that's quite large, and they're pictured here. The history of our program, though, as I said, started back in 2015. At that time, for more than 2 decades prior to that, we were traditional in the sense we had 5 discrete 600 level courses, 1 in biostatistics, epidemiology, health behavior, health policy management, and environmental sciences and engineering. So we had that traditional program, and when we got together to start talking about what we might do going forward, we had a lot of feedback from students, as well as faculty and students and staff that we took in as part of that process. And we had a series of committees. So we had a planning committee that worked for about a year, then a development committee that put a structure around what our curriculum change would look like. And then once we had the structure in place, we had an implementation committee to sort of put the meat on the bones, so to speak, and really get the details of what curriculum would be. And then that sort of morphed into the instructors that we recruited to be part of the actual curriculum, and then the core teaching team. So it was probably a good way in retrospect to do this, because we engaged a lot more people by having separate sort of year-long committees. Some of the people did transfer from one committee to the next. I think Karen was involved in nearly all of those committees, for example, but we didn't sort of wear anybody out in the planning process, and we kind of got everybody engaged along the way. So in 2018, we were able to launch our new competency-based integrated core. And we now have had it running since 2018. And in 2019, we launched 13 new concentrations in the MPH program. We follow a continuous quality improvement process, and toward the end of the talk, I'll come back to what that looks like. But that's always been a really important foundation of how we think about our curriculum change process. Another foundational aspect, and one that I think, again, upon reflection was really helpful to us, is that we established with the first planning committee a set of guiding principles for what we wanted to be based on in terms of these curriculum changes. And obviously student-centered. We wanted it to be efficient for faculty and students and staff. We wanted to bring in the best practices on teaching and learning. We actually wanted to remain with our roots on practice and field-based work at the MPH level. We wanted to be nimble enough to address emerging issues. We wanted our global and our local focus, leverage the strengths that we do have as a school, be responsive to employers, and so on. And what I'll say is, every time we convened a new committee to go to the next step, we put these guiding principles up and revised them accordingly, so that it kind of got improved as we went along, and added the insights of different folks along the way. So here, this slide gives you a representation of the actual structure. This is up on our website, so if anybody wants to look at that, if you just Google the Gillings MPH core, you will find this structure. So it's 15 credits. We have that's required for the core. This is the overall structure of the program. I'm not going to talk about all of these elements except right here on this slide. We could probably talk at length about any one of these components, because we have required concentration courses that are another 15 credits. And then we have our practicum, which is a minimum of 200 hours. We have a comprehensive exam that they take between the first and second year of the program. And we have a culminating experience of 3 credits that's really based within the concentrations, and then 9 credits of electives. So it's 42 credits overall, and we're going to talk mostly today about just the MPH core itself. And this was a graphical depiction that one of our students actually came up with that sort of talked a little bit about her perspective as her journey in public health. And this sort of takes that structure and puts it into a graphical display and how our curriculum actually lines up. So at the base, you see that we start off in the core talking about describing and prioritizing public health issues. Then in the spring semester, we're developing, implementing, and evaluating and leading public health solutions. And then we're building from there on deepening our knowledge in the concentration area. We're then applying learning in our practicum-based experience. And then we're integrating knowledge through the comprehensive exam, integration and applying and really synthesizing that information, as well in the culminating experience. And so we like this graphical display from one of our students. So the practicum day really is a fun day for all of us, both for the current students who have just completed their practicum, and then for all our new incoming students in their first year who are trying to figure out what a practicum is and how to get started and who they might contact and so on. So this is a celebration day. But I'm not really going to talk about practicum here. I'm going to talk more about the core, but there are these other key elements that make up the overall structure of the MPH that we think are critical to learning. So the CEIF curriculum design categories, you might have seen this article that came out recently, and there's a link here for the trends report that CEF put out that shows what other schools of public health are doing. And what we've learned, and we thought this was a really helpful article, and it shows where we're categorized, that our curriculum and the changes we made fall into what they refer to as category C, that third block on the right-hand side. We don't follow traditional, if we stayed with our traditional model, we would be in curriculum A. We've now sort of morphed into this integrated curriculum that doesn't really follow a discipline specific, it's interdisciplinary. And you'll hear more about that, how that works as Karen goes on. And then it combines multiple public health disciplines and foundational competencies. It is competency-based. And it really falls within this third category of curriculum. And so here's just the big snapshot overview of the MPH core. And after this slide, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. But the overview of the MPH core curriculum, what we start with in the summer of the, as students are beginning to enroll in our program, we send them out a link to what we call Compass. Compass is the core online modules to promote and accelerate student success. There's 9 modules. You can see the topics here. We welcome them. We get them familiar with Gillings and our mission and our philosophy. We give some orientation to technology. We talk about ethics and justice and our honor code. We have reviews and little mini assessments on writing and quantitative skills. And then if students need some help, we get them some help to follow up based on what they do on those assessments. And then we just, this is really setting the foundation for hitting the ground running when they start the program. In the fall, as I mentioned before, the fall semester is all about describing and prioritizing public health issues. There's 3 courses, each of 2 credits that you'll hear more about. Understanding public health, methods and measures and analysis. And then in the spring semester, it's all about developing, implementing, leading, and communicating public health solutions. So we get to action in the spring semester on conceptualizing public health solutions, developing and implementing and evaluating public health solutions, and leading from the inside out, which is a very cool 2-credit course to get them ready for the practicum. In the summer, they take the practicum, they actually work on their practicum, and then there's a follow-up to the practicum that really brings into professional education and other practice-based activities upon reflection from their practicum. You can see we go from the fall, where we have a white paper based on the fall semester coursework, and the spring term, there's an overall project that takes on the efforts of the spring courses. And there's some cross-cutting activities that you'll hear more about. What's important to mention as well is that within the fall and within the spring, we try to integrate the content for these courses. We also do not just this vertical integration, but we also do a horizontal integration. And with that, I will turn it over.
Thank you, Laura. Well, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. So yes, following up with what Laura just described, I just wanted to focus on this diagram to the right, your right, which is really these 8 domains of the 22 foundational competencies and how they're grouped. And it can be very helpful in designing a curriculum to understand these broad groupings. But as Laura noted, what really helped us as a school was developing sort of the themes for the semester. So having the focus on describing the problems in the first or fall semester, and then really focusing on solution development in the spring. Next slide. And of course, we did our mapping, and you can see here we have 7 courses across which those 22 foundational competencies are mapped. Next slide. And so, as we said about the themes for the semesters, I think it's really important. I mean, I'm not going to go into it since Laura already alluded to this, but that these team projects that are housed within a specific course, but they really end up enabling the students to integrate from the courses that they're taking simultaneously. And we have both that horizontal and vertical integration. But the projects map to those themes for the semester. And I also wanted to really highlight sort of these cross-cutting activities. And we really, and as part of the CQI, we've really been pivoting to have more of a anti-racist and equity lens for the content. And so we really work to encourage a deeper dive for our students and really resonate with the changes that are happening nationwide. But there's also focus on local and global, the evidence-based approaches, teamwork, which is so critical, communications, ethics, and leadership. Next slide. So a little bit more about the mechanics of this project. So at the start,
Karen, you're muted.
I wasn't even touching anything and it magically changed. Okay, so I'm not sure where it cut off, but I'm just saying that the students are given topics to rank, and then, for example, then everyone who selected injury as their top topic then would be put together. And again, they're from different concentrations because we really want to have this sort of multidisciplinary focus or of people coming to the table. And then in the fall, they have both a white paper and a poster session at the very end. And then in the spring, they have an oral pitch for the proposal and program that they've developed. Next slide. And again, this point has already been made, but really wanted to emphasize that it's like a tapestry, essentially, that we're weaving, and that we're weaving both like during the semester across these different courses, and then also from fall to spring. Next slide. And also emphasizing this the skill integration, a knowledge integration that happens and that we work very actively to foster. So here I wanted to share this example. And so this is actually a slide from the end of their second semester, at the end of their spring semester. And I wanted to give a shout out to the students who shared their work with us, a student team, wonderful student team, Eliana Armora Langoni, Snigdha Pendereddy, Hannah Rice, and Alpha Shrista. And they all selected injury as their topic in the fall. So let's look at and highlight like how they went from the fall to the spring. Next slide. So they started off with an injury topic, but they fairly shortly thereafter selected, they wanted to focus on women and specifically rural women in Colombia. All of the students were very interested in, a global health focus. And so throughout the semester, they worked to better understand this problem, which is one of those wicked problems that is really affected by the historical context within the country. But you can see here on the left-hand side, this is the end of the semester, the poster session where the students present, and we have, 18 different TAs and all the teaching team come, as well as other students across the school and faculty to come and see these posters. And then you can see Laura there also giving the overview. And then on the right-hand side is there's a poster that they presented. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see here, like they're deepening of the understanding of this problem, including like the events that happened in Colombia, the La Violencia, the FARC groups developing the 1960, like the mass displacement and the armed conflict that happened in the countrysides, and particularly in these rural areas, and that the women in particular were the most or one of the most vulnerable groups. And so they use the epidemiology, they think more in depth about the determinants, and also like what are their the most important health outcomes that they want to focus on. So next slide. And here's the one of the competencies that mapped, and this is a really important one. Is really emphasized actually across the core, which is discuss the means by which structural bias, social inequities, and racism undermine health, and create challenges for achieving health equity at organizational, community, and societal levels. And I think you can see this one really highlights. They have these important tools, and with the new CEF guidelines, a really wonderful incorporation of systems thinking, which hadn't been really used or focused on in the past. So where they learn causal loop diagrams to help them think through the processes, and fairly complex processes that help deepen and solidify the problems in these countries or perpetuate them. And in this example, they were focused on how the armed conflict leads to trauma, chronic stress, and then adverse health outcomes, which then cycles through to poverty, but then also how the trauma can change the community organizations and changing the social support, and at the same time also lead to corrupt governments and this problem with the lack of police and the justice system. And this is just really scratching the surface, but a start. And then on the right-hand side, we see the socioecologic framework. And again, thinking of not just the individuals, but how they're housed with their interpersonal connections, and then surrounded by their living and working conditions, and then the regional, national, and global systems that or which these problems take place. Next slide. There, sorry. Okay, and then the second, I realize we're close to time, but just focusing on what happens in the second semester where they work through the decision-making, the intervention, and evaluation, dissemination, sustainability. Next slide. And here are the couple of the competencies that are mapped. And here are examples of the stakeholders that they plan to engage in their project at each of the different levels of the socioecologic framework. Next slide. And here, I think it's really important. I want to emphasize the evidence-based decision-making. So starting with the PICO literature review, using the LEAD framework to examine the available evidence, and then using the Pew matrix to select the intervention. And you see here on the left-hand side, this is how they landed on intergenerational trauma treatment model, which included cognitive behavioral therapy as well as psychoeducation, and really the focus on the intergenerational aspects of the trauma, and that this proved to be highly effective, feasible, adaptable, and scalable based on the literature that they reviewed. Next slide. Here's an example of their evaluation plan. So both primary indicators as well as additional measurements with a pre-test, post-test design. Next slide. And then really thinking about the impact of their intervention, like for the positive consequences that would occur with the placement of the intervention in the community. And next slide. And I really just want to leave you with like sort of, you can see, I think many of us on this call are very interested in public health pedagogy, and seeing this shift from the fall to the spring of, the understanding of gender-based violence in this community as a public health problem, and then thinking more in depth, like in a larger scale, not just the women, but also their children and the community, and like trying to find a solution that's sort of addressing the intergenerational trauma, and that like how complex this the problem is, and then a wicked problem, but then also that the solutions also need to be multifaceted in nature. And then I would say that then the students practice again sort of this application and critical thinking at a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy when they get to the MPH comprehensive exam, and when they're studying for that, which again is another application, sort of problem focused. Next slide. And so we also have involvement in community partners in teaching. Here's an example. They did qualitative data analysis from the ACCURE project with accountability for cancer care by undoing racism and equity, of which Alex Lightfoot was an investigator on that project. Just last week, they got to meet Melvin Jackson, who's a practice partner, and they're learning this in context of community mapping. And they have engagement in other courses as well with community partners. Next slide. And here's just a quote from one of the students after they completed our this course, Leading from the Inside Out, led by Meg Landfried. And it really spoke to the tools that they learned to be able to discuss problems like related to police brutality and racism in America, especially in light of, the events of last summer, but then, sort of in the broader societal context. Next slide. And then I'll pass it off to Lara, and just also want to say that I'm with, imagine like 20 other people in my little square here that are really, fundamental to implementing this. And it's really, we stand shoulder to shoulder in implementing this. And it's just such a fantastic team to work with. And I'm just one of many, but thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And I'll just wrap up with saying that we are very committed to quality improvement. This has been rolled out since 2018. Each year we do a summer retreat and we try to do the improvements that we needed. One of the first areas after the first institution of this was a really concerted effort to do, for example, more anti-racism education within the entire core. So that's been one example. There's many examples of how we've reshaped courses, we've reshaped the sequencing and so on as time went on. And then just to wrap up with, we really do believe that this new curriculum has just taken us a huge leap forward to help us preparing public health professionals to really address the next generation problems and the current generation problems in ways that, we were not able to do when we were kind of siloed in our disciplines prior to this. Our faculty working together across many disciplines has been an amazing learning opportunity for faculty as well as for our students. And you can see that it really has paid off. Our students do extremely well in the job market. They are developing those leadership roles. And our curriculum is flexible to deal with some of the emerging issues like COVID that came out and how we could address that through the project work or through the practicum work or even in our comprehensive exam, for example. So just to wrap up with acknowledgements, this is Pamela and Yasmin. Pamela's been with our project for the entire time as one of our key staff and excellent collaborators. And Yasmin's relatively new, but they helped with this presentation. But then all the other teaching team members, our teaching assistants, and our participants through the many aspects of the curriculum. So thank you very much for your attention. We're happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lennan and Dr. Yates. It is mind-boggling what a huge undertaking, and to see how all the components work together and the team you had, and just the overwhelming success that you've had. I mean, it's just a phenomenal program. So thank you so much for sharing. So at this time, we would love to take questions from the audience. We would love to see what you would have to say, what you would like to learn more about. If all you need to do is click on that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we can read some questions that have been entered. To get started, let's ask Dr. Kruger, how do you bring in those diverse voices into your courses? How do you identify who you're going to bring in? What goes into that thought process?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of ways to bring in diverse voices and perspectives. As you look into the literature, you find that it's mostly a history taught by or written by the conquerors, right, in any sort of history. And so I think it's important that when we're looking at laws and policies, at even the challenges in which incarcerated individuals face, that we need to have a voice from them. And there are a lot of really great sources out there that really provide an opportunity to hear those voices. One of them is the Marshall Project. And that is a great way to get some on the ground views. I think it's also good to highlight for students when you have diverse authors and diverse scholars. And so I will identify that we are reading, a paper written by someone at this university who identifies as. And in fact, in the past, I actually have scholars who come in who are part of a variety of communities, including the Native population, and talks about some of the challenges that Natives face in the criminal justice system. And so it's been a real joy to be able to bring all those diverse views and backgrounds and readings to the students throughout the course, because I think that's key when we're talking about these issues, not just reading mainstream authors. Thank you.
Great. Here's one for Dr. Lennan or Dr. Yates. With such a massive undertaking, what were the key challenges that you had during the rollout of the new integrated core? What, some lessons learned? What wouldn't you have done? Looking back, how could you have done things better, or what lessons did you learn?
I'll start with one, and then Karen, please jump in. One of the things that's both a strength and a challenge, right, is that as a long-standing school of public health with a lot of history, our departments are so strong. Every single one of them have their own rich history. They can write their own history, and it's a fascinating history actually as well. So when in the traditional model with the 5 courses, the departments would just put a course forward and say, here's our course, and as long as students learn all this in health policy management, or all this in epidemiology, or all this in health behavior, then they should meet the competencies and move forward into departmental degrees. Now we have one school-wide degree, so that transformation alone was a big step. So it came from a point of strength, but yet a challenge to get us to come together and say, the synergy that happens across the departments can really be greater than any one single departmental view on these public health issues, particularly for a practitioner-based degree like our MPH. So it took us a while to get through those conversations and to say, you might have to give up a little bit from your original course to fit within this integrated model. And everybody did give up a little bit on those 5 courses in order to come together to be part of the whole. So during the process of getting there and doing the competency mapping and making sure that we had covered the bases, we had some really tough conversations. But the aha moments that happened along the way among our faculty really gave me hope that we were on the right path during the process. And then now seeing what our students can do in real world examples, like you just heard from Karen, one of the projects that we highlighted, it's just amazing what they're able to do together when they're really listening to each other from different disciplines and really trying to solve these very difficult public health problems. Because in the real world, they're going to be in jobs where they have to work together anyway. And so here we are, right? So I guess that's both a challenge and a lesson learned from my perspective.
Yeah, I guess I would also add that it really, I fostered an appreciation for the new MPH foundational competencies that I don't think anyone, well, like initially that we didn't really know, but that working together has really, I think, like deepened the teaching team's understanding of public health as well, because we're an R1 university and many of us like have PhDs from our discipline, but then when those disciplines come together, it's such a rich conversation, because it's like we see this elephant from, somebody's talking about the trunk and somebody's talking about the ears and somebody's talking about the tail. But then it really helps, try to better understand the complexity. And it was something and I think many of my colleagues who teach in the core didn't have that appreciation, but it has grown over time. And I think that's why it takes like a group of committed individuals that are willing to have those kinds of conversations and also, discuss like, well, I call it this, but you call it that. And then the students also bringing it to our attention. It's like we needed a new vocabulary or a dictionary of like the different terms, like depending on the discipline. And then we try to come to some common words and vocabulary.
Thank you for that insight. Dr. Kruger, how do you anticipate the massive BLM movement, impacting your course? Do you see that, you're going to make some changes due to all of the social awareness and the different protests, and also including maybe the recent events and how the different perception for different socioeconomic protest and how those are appreciated and, processed.
I think it's so important that we talk about current events within our courses. Whether it's related to our course content or not, acknowledging what's happening outside of the classroom is a way to build a more inclusive environment. In this course, it's central to what we're talking about. And in fact, some of our content, our readers and our speakers are part of some of the local movements. And so I like to highlight that for students of how they can get out of the classroom and connect with these organizations, but we talk about it. We have tough conversations. We talk about police brutality. We talk about racism. We at first have to build the environment to have some of those tough conversations. And currently we're only in week 3, but as we go throughout the semester, really just breaking down some of the content, concepts, and what as public health professionals we can view, I think, is key, and how we can support some of these movements is also an area that I think is a great way to tie it into the curriculum, real life, and the what next for our students. So it continues to shape this course and where we go with the content. In fact, a student just brought up last week, they want to discuss segregation within institutions. And I said, that's a really great topic. We should talk about that. And let's talk about some of the historical roots of that and tie that into our discussion. So I love when students begin to see some of the social media posts and bring that into the classroom.
And then in follow up to that, is this a unique course to Buffalo? Is this happening at other institutions? Do you think other schools should implement it?
I would love for more schools to implement it. In fact, before we were talking, I found out that Laura and Karen have a course in their institution. From my understanding, we're one of the only schools to have an undergraduate course in this topic, not at the graduate level. And so I think the earlier we can introduce students to some of these topics, the better. In the future, we hope to cross-list this with graduate students too, to begin building out some of these specialty courses within our MPH and PhD program.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for everything that you have shared with us today. It's no wonder why you are all awardees. It was just amazing what you have accomplished. So thank you so much. I would like to point out that the webinar has been recorded. It will be posted on the ASPPH webinar event pages. You can go here to find that. Give us a little bit to get that processed and uploaded, and we'll have that up there. You may also enter a 1 credit hour for the CPH credential. I would like to invite you to attend our upcoming ASPPH Present series. We have one tomorrow on communicating vaccine trust. It is in coordination with the DeBeaumont Foundation and the Association of American Public Health Association. We also have another Delta Omega Curriculum Award winner presenting next week, and we would like for you to join us there as well. And we would also like to invite you to the ASPPH annual meeting. You may visit the ASPPH webpage for all the speakers, all of the agendas, everything that's coming up. It's going to be a phenomenal event. So much timely information. We're great. We have Dr. Fauci, we have Stacey Abrams. We're recognizing some of our public health leaders in such a timely manner. So we hope that you will be able to join us for that as well. And thank you for joining us for the ASPPH Presents webinars, and we hope to see you at future events. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, and I hope you all have a very safe and warm day and future ahead. Thank you so much.